Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. Well, today I thought I would talk about owning the frame. It's one of the things that I talk about a lot when I do workshops or I do seminars, is I talk about the responsibility of the photographer to look at everything that's in the frame, not just their subject, but also elements in the foreground and the background, and making a conscious choice as to whether include or exclude certain elements in the frame. It's real easy to lose sight of all those other things and not really discover them until we look at the images in the computer, and by that time it's often too late. Even though you may have the ability to clone something out or remove it, it really doesn't develop your way of seeing, as it helps improve your skills in Photoshop. And one of the things that I like to stress is that I want people, when they take a camera and they point it at something, to really take their time looking throughout the frame and make a decision in terms of not just what they're going to shoot, but how they're going to shoot it. And specifically, looking at all the elements that are in the frame and making a choice as to how to include or exclude some of those elements from the frame. So I'm going to start off with a shot here by Matt Nelson. Let's see. It looks like it was probably shot in India. I don't see any location data here, but I really like this shot for the unusual point of view, how he brought the camera down to this person's foot level and created a really dramatic and beautiful scene. I've seen a lot of images of Indians by the Ganges River, which I'm going to assume that this is, but this is a really striking shot. And the way the light passes through that person's clothes and the way the feet are rendered while they appear to be doing a wash is really striking. But what I start paying attention to is everything else in the frame. We have this other material here, which is probably part of the wash that they're doing here. And then we also see these boats within the frame here, and a person who's actually fully submerged in the water. Then we have some other boats here, and we have a figure who looks to be a photographer who's sitting there making their own shot. And so here I think that this shot really works because all of these elements, this material here, the boats in the background, the person submerged in the water, the boats, all help to provide us a sense of place. Other than the photographer here who's in the frame, I think that all these elements here help to provide a sense of place. So the inclusion of all these things play an important role in the success of this photograph. Now, if I had been shooting this person here would have bothered me a little bit. Unless there was someone that was particularly importance to the shot, I don't think they add anything to it. So short of asking the person to move out of the frame, which may or may not have been an option, it would have been, well, changing the camera position by shifting over to the left a little more to completely eliminate that from the frame, because this structure on which this person is sitting is not particularly important. And so just making the slight shift to the left would have helped eliminate them, or maybe even getting just a little closer, or if a zoom lens was being used, they were using like a 14 to 24 here. So this may have been all the way at the 14 millimeter focal length. So by just slowly adjusting the zoom slightly to eliminate this, and this area right here at the edge of the frame would not have been a huge loss. One of the things I talk about is scanning the edges of your frame, because the most intrusive things, the most distracting elements in the frame usually occur along the edges of the frame. So if you moved in tighter or adjusted the zoom to eliminate this and this, you still would have the heart of the image, and it would really hold up. Here's a shot by Johnny Armani, and looks like it was a band before or after an event of some sort, the St. John's Parade, which I'm not sure where they were shooting. Again, he was shooting with an ultra wide, much like the previous photographer. This is an 11 to 16. And one of the things you'll find when you're using lenses that are wider than 35 millimeters is they include a lot in the frame, which can be a good thing, But it can also be a really bad thing, because the wider the focal length and the more things it includes in the frame, the more potential for distractions that can occur. Here, I think he makes great use of the focal length. One, by going vertical, which you wouldn't think you'd want to do when you're doing basically an environmental portrait of someone. But in this case, it works really, really well. And so we have this drummer here who is obviously the focal point of the photograph. And I love the expression, the body language, and that's great. But let's see what else is in the frame. We have this tuba player here, which is obviously associated with this guy here, and it adds a really great element, because it tells me that there was something going on. This is not just a singular individual who's out on the street, but he's playing a role here. In the distance here, we see a bus, so I'm going to assume that this is the bus that was transporting all of the band members. And we have a house that, though it isn't really distinctive in terms of architecture, it still provides us a sense of place, that we're in the suburbs somewhere, and it gives us some insight into where we are. So again, everything here within the frame plays a role. When I look at the edges of the frame in this case, I'm not seeing anything especially intrusive. There's this little thing here on the edge of the frame, and I really can't tell exactly what that is. But one of the things I do notice is that the feet are cut off at the bottom of the frame. And if I have any sort of quibble with this photograph, is that the feet are cut off. And that would have been fairly easy to remedy by not just tilting the camera down, because you don't want to create unneeded distortion on the subject, but actually just physically moving a little lower. It looks like he was already at this subject's waist level. So Johnny here had already gotten physically down in order to shoot at something other than eye level, which was a good move. But again, by scanning the edges of the frame, he might have noticed that there was an issue here with the feet being cut off, and would have just made a slight change in the camera position in order to remedy that. But here, as you can see, everything in the frame really works to serve this shot. Now here's a shot by Simon Houssein. It's called Winter Story. And this is a beautiful shot here. We look to be in some sort of field, and you have this figure moving into it with a pot, which I would assume contains water or something, and it's has all this fog in the scene, and we have these sort of trees in the background. Now here, there's so little in the frame in terms of the background that you don't have a lot of potential for distracting elements, but it's always there. But nevertheless, it's something you want to pay attention to, and in this case, I think that the image works really well because of its simplicity. In one of the previous videos, I talked about brightness and contrast and sharpness, the 5 visual draws, and how they can help us to control where the viewer looks in the image. And this subject has all of that. It has brightness, it has contrast, it has sharpness, it has color saturation, and it also has this wonderful gesture of the arm going up to actually hold the pot as he's moving through the field. And that's wonderful. But I think that one of the reasons why it works so well is because the background is so clean and it's simple. I think that the clutter of the background is reduced just by the fact that it's a foggy day. I don't know how clearly we would read this figure if it was a bright, sunny day and all of this was very clear. There may have been elements in this fog that might have been distracting. So in this case, it really ends up serving the image really, really well. Here's a shot by Mike Beecham, and we have a lot of street photographs that get submitted into the Candid Frame Flickr pool. And one of the things that we face as street photographers is the fact that we have very little control over what's happening on the street, especially in the background. If you take a look at a lot of the images in the Flickr pool, you'll see photographs of really interesting subjects, but then we also have all this noise, all this clutter in the background. Sometimes it's cars, sometimes it's other people, sometimes it's buildings, machinery, whatever it is. And while we may have a great moment, sometimes we're dealing with a weakened image because there were elements in the background that we had no control of, but that end up competing with the subject for the viewer's attention. Now, Mike here faced that very same issue here, in the fact that he has this woman that's walking into the light, but he has what appears to be a bar or a deli here with a lot of people in the background. But what saves the image and makes it so effective is that he photographs this when the woman actually walks into the light, creating a great point of contrast between her and the dark tones of the background in this edge of the frame here. Because we have that huge contrast, our attention is solely on her and her really confident stride as she walks down the street. And all these other elements, though they're still visible in the shot because they're so much darker than this, are not the potential distraction that they could be if this entire scene were more evenly illuminated. If this quality of sunlight was hitting this entire scene, you still might be attracted to her because she's wearing that saturated red top and that blue skirt, and her stride and the point of focus would be right on her. But all these other things, including this woman here who seems to be wearing a light jacket, would be a real issue in terms of our eye going from her to here and here to her, and it would weaken the impact of the shot. But in this case, Mike chooses the quality of the light, the shaft of light itself, to focus the viewer's attention on where it wants to be. And you'll see that in many of my photographs, and a lot of the photographs that I'm seeing posted to the Flickr group, is that photographers are often using the quality of the light or little shafts of light to help bring attention to a certain area of the frame. When you're dealing with a lot of clutter, when you're dealing with a lot of busyness on the street, the choices of camera position, focal length, and all that may not be enough in order to allow us to be able to isolate the subject and control the viewer experience. So one of the best things to do is just look and see what's happening with the light. And that can inform not only what you shoot, but also where you're going to shoot from in order to make the image successful. Now here's a shot here at a parade with this young girl made by Rule Santos. And this is a great shot, and talk about a situation where you have no control. You're often relegated to the sidelines here as these floats and these people go down the parade route, and there's just a lot of stuff there. There's the people on the parade route. There's the gates here that separate the people from the street. You have the hands coming in. All of this stuff here you have no control over. But one of the reasons why this image works is because all these things that I've just mentioned that are in the background give us a sense of the event and the place. So in this case, it really ends up working very, very nicely. Having the girl prominently in the foreground and her being so much brighter than everything else helps to draw our attention here. But even as our eyes wander around the frame, we're getting little bits of information about what this event is about. And also the fact that this image is sort of built on these strong diagonals that sort of lead the eye here, and then this line that sort of guides us right back to the girl. And you also have the hand that's sort of coming into the frame and providing us a sense of focus on this hand and her as well. So this is all great stuff. I don't know about this hand here. I mean, this hand is so dominant in the frame that that's really the only source of competition here. It looks like someone had a camera or iPad that they were shooting with. And things are happening so fast, sometimes you don't have any control over that. Shifting the camera over to the right may have eliminated some of it. I mean, you could imagine having cropped the image here and here, there. You know, that a tight crop might remedy this, or you could slightly darken the image. But again, this is one of those things that it pays to be aware of when you're shooting the image. Again, things are happening so fast, so he may not have had enough time to sort of recognize that and shift the camera and get this moment at its peak. But nevertheless, as a photographer, we have to be aware of it. We have to be paying attention to this stuff. You have this little tower pole here that has some sort of mechanisms or some sirens or some speakers there. That's not particularly important to the frame. So again, making the choice to tilt the camera slightly down would have eliminated this area here, because it becomes a point of contrast. You can't eliminate this short of cloning it out later after the fact. So sometimes as photographers, we have to just be very aware that that stuff is there, that we can't do with it, that we can't, remove it as we take the picture, but nevertheless, we have to make the effort to try and make as clean and as clean an image as we possibly can. We have some tools later on in Photoshop that allow us to, darken this or completely eliminate this by cloning. But for me, I'm always trying to get something as clean, as definitive as I can in camera. It makes me a better photographer when I do that. And lastly, I have this image by David Valera that was shot in downtown Los Angeles. And this is one of those shots where I have a great appreciation for this layered composition, because I've shot in these streets God knows how many times, and I know how much of a challenge it is to make an image on the streets of LA, especially when you do have some people at various distance from the camera. Here, I think we're dealing with this woman playing a prominent role in the frame, and our eyes go straight to her. And I think it's great that it starts off with this really sort of strong body language with her hands on her hips. But as we go into the frame, we see these other figures on the second plane. This guy just walking into the frame from the left, and this guy with the hat about to walk out. And then we have a woman here who's taking a picture here. So I like the balance that this image creates. I think that it makes really great use of the frame and having various people within a single frame. It's really hard to come up with a balanced composition when you have multiple people in the frame, because many times people are overlapping with each other, which is always a big issue for me in my photographs. Is that when I'm trying to include multiple people in the frame, I'm often trying to time it so that there is some separation happening. I don't a beat before, and this person would have been overlapping with this woman here, and it wouldn't work. We're having a little bit of that here, but that doesn't necessarily ruin the shot for me. Ideally, I think I could do without this guy here, but he doesn't ruin the shot for me. But again, I would be, as I was shooting, I would probably be as aware as I can of what's outside of the frame and trying to time it. Sometimes you just have to make the shot and make do. Even though I would have loved it with this, I still would make the shot. But I would also stay there for as long as possible to see if there were other interesting people, within the frame. Because he's shooting from the curb into the street and the buildings, he includes a lot of words and text in there, which is something I tend to avoid. But in this case, it gives us, again, a sense of place, where we are, and sort of these are things that you're going to see as part of that street. So while I may try to avoid verbiage in my photographs, it doesn't ruin the shot for me. This is what's there, and I'm not being distracted by these things. They're so small, I'm really not trying to make the effort to read them as I might a more prominent sign. But I think that, as a layered composition, this is a great shot. Granted, it could be better if we didn't have this guy here in the frame, but as you can see here, it's taking responsibility for everything in the frame that really helps to make this photograph as strong as it is. So again, if you're listening and finding us for the first time here, I'm pulling images from the Candid Frame Flickr group here, and people are signing up quite a lot every day and submitting some wonderful images from which I pull from to do these videos each week. But I also encourage you guys to dialogue with each other and make comments on each other's photographs, and just encourage each other's passion for photography. And as well as this YouTube channel, I also do The Candid Frame, and it is a podcast, an interview show in which I feature conversations with photographers of all different genres from all over the world. So if you have a passion for photography, you want to take a listen, and go to thecandidframe.com, and there you'll find an archive of over 248 interviews at this point. And I'm sure you'll find many things that you'll enjoy listening to right there. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.